It's often said that important efforts in an organization have to start at the top, and no issue is more exemplary of this saying than safety. We'll talk with the C-suite executive with a long, distinguished career in occupational health and safety up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Safety at work is more than freedom from physical injury. To be safe, you have to feel safe. Join us each week as we discuss psychologically healthy and safe work in the USA. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels. I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So just imagine you're the vice president of safety and security for a company with 60,000 employees in the US and Canada. First of all, it's a tremendous responsibility to look out for the health and safety of that many people. And you also have to look out for them in cases where they might not even recognize the hazards that they're being exposed to. It's not only the employees, but it's the clients and customers and other people that you come in contact with in a role like that. And it's a big job. And as I was sharing before I push record, I, having been more of a public sector guy, haven't had the opportunity to meet people in the C-suite of a major organization that has this level of responsibility, and I got lucky. So this episode and this conversation is going to be with one of those folks who has that level of responsibility and has a long background in history in occupational health and safety. So we're going to get right into it with my first question. So who is Dr. Darryl Hill?
Who is Dr. Darryl C. Hill? Thanks for that question, Dr. Daniels. I would say, David, first and foremost is that I'm an EHS professional for over 35 years, primarily in the private sector, also an instructor in higher education. I've been an adjunct faculty member for 27 years. And also, I would say that I'm an avid and loving father and family member, and really just enjoy being around people. I just like people, and I think that's really what gravitated me to the health and safety profession. But that's Darryl C. Hill very succinctly.
Okay, right on. So over the course of your long and distinguished career, I'm sure you've seen lots and heard lots. So tell me, when you hear the concept or the set of terms, psychological health and safety, what pops to mind for you when you hear that?
Yeah, excellent question. I would say what pops in my mind immediately for the psychological safety is really about how do we as an organization or for any company provide a culture of inclusiveness, provides a culture of collaboration, openness, transparency that will really foster that company to realize their true potential and really to become a resilient organization that will facilitate growth, innovation, and in essence, improve their overall performance. So in essence, in summary, it's to look at those areas in their organization that they want to embrace their entire team, their entire organization at all levels in the organization. And as you alluded to earlier in the introduction, that may also include your external stakeholders, but what would also provide and foster growth, innovation, and to improve overall performance. That's what comes to mind when I hear psychological safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there are those who believe that growth is stifled by conversations about safety. At least I think some people think that the safety people are just out there to slow things down and all that type of thing. And that's not accurate at all. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty convinced that the safer you make it, the more growth you can have. That's, again, a little bit of a personal opinion. We may get into that a little bit. So tell me a little bit about how you ended up in the safety biz.
Yeah, very interesting question. Thanks for asking. And I would say that how I ended up in this great health and safety profession, EHS profession, for those that have the environmental responsibility as well, EHS, is probably not dissimilar to other colleagues in EHS professionals that maybe just entered or is entering the profession today. So I started off as an industrial engineering major many, many years ago. Let's just say over 35 years ago in the early 80s. I was an IE major when I stepped on campus in conservative Ames, Iowa State University. Go Cyclones. And it wasn't until the second semester of my sophomore year, the late Dr. Jack Bino, I had to take an elective class in occupational safety as an IE major. And Dr. Bino, he pulled me to the side, Darryl, have you ever thought about changing your major or thinking about a new career opportunity in occupational safety? And I immediately thought, in my reaction to Dr. Bino, I'm like, you can actually major in occupational safety? This can be a viable career choice? So I wasn't fully convinced, Dr. Daniels. From that first interaction, I completed the first course. So I had one more free elective. I took, needless to say, occupational safety. And I determined at that time, because it was interfacing with people, as I started at the beginning of this podcast, and that it was an opportunity to make a difference, to protect the workers, to protect the environment, that was the right career choice for me. And now if you fast forward to 30 to 35 years today, once again, I can see many that are in the EHS profession. They said, I fell upon or I stumbled upon EHS. EHS found me. Right. I didn't necessarily find environmental health and safety.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of, and I've heard that similar discussion, that similar conversation about how folks kind of almost fall into it, or it finds them, or they finally decided it's something that they want to do. And so how does one start off being a safety person and end up in the C-suite as well? Because here's the other view, is that there are a lot of organizations who talk about the importance of safety until it comes time to give safety any real authority to do anything, to get a budget, to get, the oversight, to get, it sometimes it starts to lack because, we'll create a safety position. Let's get that, let's give, that person who has 8 jobs, let's give him a 9th and call him the safety person. And we'll put him down there about 4 or 5 levels down below the CEO, and they'll take care of that stuff for us and keep us out of trouble. So chat a little bit about your journey to the C-suite, actually doing safety.
Yes, excellent question. And I would say my very quick word of advice, and I'll expand upon certainly the comments and try to provide some examples certainly during the discussion, is we always want to demonstrate, and we've heard this before, we want to demonstrate our value add, okay? Right. What's that value proposition? Even in the early stages of your journey, in the early stages of your career development. However, and I'll unpack that a little bit more, Dr. Daniels, in a moment, but here's another key point before I even expand upon that comment, in terms of there are organizations, there are companies that maybe that's all they want in their EHS professional is compliance, that they just want to certainly implement minimal processes invest in their health and safety programs as little as possible. And that may be fine, for that organization. Now, I will say, as we evolved, as we have transitioned over the last, let's say, several years, 10, 15, 20 years, you are seeing more companies that have embraced environmental social governance. They have embraced the importance of the EHS professional role. But still, there are some companies that's out there that all they want to do is, I want that EHS professional to keep me in compliance. So the question the EHS professional needs to answer or ask themselves and then answer is, what organizations do I want to align myself with? I think that's first and foremost.
Right.
Fortunately for myself, and I've been very blessed in my career, is that I have aligned myself with organizations that they wanted to have a best-in-class EHS culture, a best-in-class organizational culture. That safety culture is a subset of organizational culture. So I just wanted to highlight that point. So with that, David, as the baseline with the organizations over 35 years, is that I was immediately in a position at very early stages, maybe even as a plant safety coordinator, a construction site safety coordinator, that even in those roles, you want to demonstrate, how are you aligning your safety processes, your management systems, with the overall organizational goals and objectives. And I think if we start with that mentality, as we begin to acquire additional competencies, skill sets, attributes, those interpersonal, skills that we are going to demonstrate driving those results. So then that provides an opportunity to move up in the organization. And I would say that the second part of that equation, David, is that, you have to, as an EHS professional, look at where do you see yourself in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and actually develop that roadmap to get you there, to your career goals. Now, fortunately, once again, I have been fortunate and blessed to be part of great companies and organizations that provided a formal framework for development in many cases. However, as we've probably heard this comment before, you are the one that is most responsible for your professional development.
That's right.
So it's like using that Stephen Covey comment, begin with the end in mind.
Yes.
And it's where do you want to end up in the organization. Now, some may be content with staying in a plant role, divisional role, which is perfectly fine. But as the opportunity presented itself, I was able to move up in various organizations.
Wow. Yeah, I'm a student of and think a lot about the 7 habits. I really do. I think there's a real close connection when we start having conversations about safety as well, that some of the challenges that organizations have from a safety systems perspective is that they don't think about the end that they're looking for. They're simply looking for compliance. So the law says we have to do this. Well, how do we do that? And they miss out on the opportunity to develop, something that's well above compliance, that actually will grow your company, will actually, help you attract the best talent, will actually help you, give, better value to shareholders. All of those things that at least I hear business people talking about, the safety, environmental safety, occupational health and safety, risk management, any of those types of fields are going to help you get there. They're not an obstacle. They really aren't, particularly if you get the right person. So, Dr. Hill, again, never having been in the C-suite of a public or a private sector organization, and again, I know lots about the public sector, about what goes on there. A little bit of an aside is I had opportunity to serve as executive director of workforce safety in, and I'll say it, the city of Atlanta. This has been years ago. And I thought I'd, come into this community of people. We get to work together. Well, come to find out I was the only person in the entire United States in that role in a major city. And we couldn't find one really anywhere. And it is certainly a role that is much more common in the private sector. However, I as we talked a little bit before, there are sometimes different perceptions about what goes on up in the C-suite and what's going on at on the shop floor type of thing. So where the folks in the C-suite we've got this safety management system and we've got these folks out there doing all these things. And so how do you monitor, or how have you monitored making sure that the things that you talk about in, the senior staff meetings and these major enterprises, and how do you make sure that actually gets to the sharp end of the pencil?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's an excellent question. And I would want to start answering that question with probably one of the most, I would say, impactful, brief conversations I had with a CEO at one of the major Fortune 100 companies where I was a senior EHS executive. And that comment of the CEO shared with me right before a safety summit, it still resonated with me to the day. And he said very directly, he said, Darryl, I need 3 things from you, 3 things. And it was actually in this order of priority. He said, Darryl, first, I need for you to be business minded. I need for you to be business minded first. In essence, what the CEO was saying, I want to make sure that you interact with my senior executive team and make sure that your EHS goals and objectives priorities, similar to a previous comment made earlier, is aligned with the organizational strategic strategy. So that was first and foremost. Second, he said, I need for you to be a leader, right? So once again, there is certainly opportunities within professional safety organizations, within our own companies that we can develop, as I stated earlier, that career growth, that professional development on how we can be effective leaders. So that was number 2. And then third, which was really the eye opener, remember, business minded first. I need you to be a leader second. And he said, an EHS professional third. So think about that, David, for a moment. That's where we spent our time investing in our development. We're getting degrees in EHS. We're getting our professional certifications, certificates, etc. Initially, we would probably think that should be higher in that pecking order, so to speak, in the priority. But what the CEO was saying, if we really reflect, as I did, I reflect on a comment, that's a given. You don't necessarily get to those positions, even those more senior positions, if you haven't already exhibited and demonstrated those EHS technical competencies earlier in your career. So that's just to get the foot in the door, but it was those other 2 areas that the CEO reinforced that what was key. So I've taken that away from me as I've shared in my journey as I mentored, others. So with that as the framework, it was always saying, okay, how can I, in my role, make my peers, make the CEO, everyone within the span of control in the company to be successful, to help them drive their results as well. So I think that that's key. And then certainly the other aspect is to demonstrate, those leadership competencies, which there's books and books written on how to become an effective leader. But I just wanted to share that brief story and interaction that was very powerful for me. That was really beyond the midway point, as I would like to say, in my career.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, it is really important. And it goes back to a statement that you made earlier. A lot of this conversation is about the individual safety professional and where they want to be, where they want to align themselves, because there is no industry, no occupation, no anything that can't benefit from safety expertise. There isn't one. I haven't found it. And in some cases, they can benefit even when they don't know what it is. And that's the issue sometimes, because they don't know necessarily what it is. I see people talk about, they'll have in their mottos, we want to do things safe. We want to be safe. And often they don't really have any background in it, but it sounds good. So I do believe that it's important that we understand the value that we bring, but then how do we get people? It's like, getting your kids to eat the vegetables. I mean, sitting them down in front. Sometimes, you got to wrap that vegetable up, but you got to put it with something else that they like in order to get people to actually consume the vegetable. And I don't think that leaders in businesses are really much different, because ultimately they have a reason for being there, and safety has to help them, not hinder them from whatever reason they're there in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I could just add on to that comment, Dr. Daniels, and that it's a very important concept you just shared, in terms that we all in safety in our profession, in our roles, can certainly contribute to the bottom line of the organization, that we can demonstrate the benefits. I will never forget another interaction. When you get to be my age, you have a lot of stories to tell, your experiences. But I remember with another large global company where I spent many years of my career, the senior human resource officer, who came from a major oil and gas company, spent 20 years at a company. If I was the chair, everyone would be familiar with the company. And he said it was evident to him that in his experience as an HR leader that interfaced with health and safety throughout his career, is that if a company is not performing and executing well in health and safety, that other parts of their business are probably not effective and efficient as well. Right. Because the statement the senior HR official was saying is that safety is at the core of doing things the right way, right, throughout your entire operations. Right. If it's, in the area of quality, health and safety, employee retention, driving growth. He just said it's just core. And he said it's very easy to identify those companies that are exemplary in safety, are exemplary and high performers in all aspects of their business. And he was absolutely spot on. So I think that was a point you was certainly sharing in your insight. Yep.
Yes, absolutely. So I, over the last, certainly over the last year of this podcast and prior to that, have gotten into a lot of conversations about psychological safety and workplace mental health and psychological health and safety systems. And I find it still, even chatting with more what I would consider traditional health and safety folks, there's still some that go like, I don't really think that's really a safety thing. I think that's probably, and again, to the point you were just making, maybe that's something that HR should be more concerned with. So what are your thoughts about the connection between psychological safety, psychosocial hazard mitigation, psychological health and safety, those kinds of concepts, and more traditional safety management systems? Do you think there is a connection? Should there be a connection? And what would you share about that?
Yeah, certainly. I would say, David, that if we really look at the definition of, the psychological health and safety aspects, which is how do we mitigate, reduce, if not eliminate, those psychosocial risks. If we look at and begin with, you mentioned it earlier, I think in the introduction, with ISO 45003 as a guide, it really gives you that framework on how it's embedded in health and safety. Because there's really those three key areas: how the work is organized, right? how the work is organized. So when you look at our roles and responsibility, having role clarity, the job demands. So that gets into work-life balance, which I think all EHS professionals can embrace that concept. If there's lack of role clarity, if there isn't work-life balance, that is inevitably going to impact. And there's studies out there that actually digs into this a little bit deeper, which I'll give a plug, by the way, with Amy Edmondson, who's a leader in this psychological safety, psychosocial hazards, in her book titled The Fearless Organization. So if you're like me and you want more research studies, I would encourage you to get Dr. Edmondson's book. But I would go back to, once again, how work is organized. I would also say those social factors, at work. When we talk about leadership and rewards and recognition, if we think about those key, aspects, what gets measured gets done. Once again, EHS professionals know about performance measurement. So once again, if we're recognizing the right employee behaviors, for example, I can just give a brief example in my current employer in the workplace, where we're trying to look at driver behaviors and how do we reinforce the appropriate, driving behaviors, through coaching. So through coaching and recognizing the behaviors that we want our drivers to exemplify, that impacts, health and safety. So there is certainly a connection. And then the third area, when we look at 45,003, it's the work environment, which is more attributed to what an EHS professional recognizes in some of the physical safety aspects, the workplace design, the layout of equipment in the plant floor. So if you look at those three areas, I think we can immediately make that connectivity, David, to health and safety that most of us can relate to, but also looking at the psychosocial aspects around safety and health and how to mitigate those risks.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Wow. Absolutely. I'm, it's somewhat of a rhetorical question because I believe to my core that there's a connection, and I just find myself sometimes almost having to convince folks, and then there's others who just get it. I mean, just if you really think about it, as a matter of fact, I believe that if we expanded the way we look at, incident reviews and investigations and such, and didn't stop at the physical hazard, we would find lots and lots and lots of psychosocial hazards and risks that we really just hadn't paid attention to and almost normalized in some cases. And until we get to some of those, you're going to get some of the outcomes are going to really remain the same. There's a need to actually dig out the real root, and the real root is not just the fact that the forklift driver was moving a little too fast. Well, they were moving a little too fast because they were assigned too much work.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Assigned too much work. And then using another example of the psychosocial risk, maybe that fork truck driver came to work and maybe he is distracted because maybe he had a sick loved one that he had to leave at home.
That's right.
Or, he didn't have maybe someone to watch his child for daycare. So that is a risk that fork truck driver is bringing, to the workplace. So sometimes we don't think about it in that context, but I think that's really to what you and I are perfectly aligned and know the importance. If we think about it in that prism, I think we'll have a greater sense of appreciation on this topic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Darryl, so there's a question I want to ask, that is unique to you. Cause I for full disclosure, I really work to make sure that I get guests on this podcast that come from all over the place, that are very different in their views. And I have observed that the occupational safety and health profession is not one of the most diverse places I've been. I thought I was in the fire rescue service for 32 years, was a fire chief in 4 different organizations in 3 states. And I thought it was homogeneous until I came into the occupational safety and health space. So, which is, it's very heartening to be able to speak with you and probably guess that you've been a bit of a pioneer. If you've been in this for 35 years, there were probably many occasions when you looked around the room and were different in more than one way. So share just a little bit, about what that part of the journey has been like for you. And again, I'm making some assumptions here. I may be incorrect, and maybe you didn't feel like you were the only person, but so share a little bit about that part of the journey.
Yeah, I can certainly share, that part of the journey, and even as I reflect upon, my time in Ames, Iowa, Iowa State University, and I've shared this story before, that I could spend my entire day on campus of a university in the early 80s with 23 to 25,000 students, and didn't see anyone that looked like me, during the entire day on campus, going from class to class, and certainly even in the workplace. Whereas certainly, in certain meetings, not, seeing anyone else that looked like me. But even when we look at the profession, and I think even your point and observation is certainly the right one. And as we have transitioned, I think, and evolved over the years, and certainly through recruiting and to recruit in, the urban areas, I think we've seen some progress in this area.
Absolutely.
But I would certainly say, to your point, that does create on my personal journey, some, challenges, along the way. But at the basis, at the foundation, even in my experience from a plant safety coordinator to even my more senior roles in the later part of my career, at the end of the day, it's, how I can impact the organization, having that appreciation that everyone comes to the table, that brings their life experience, has something to contribute to the organization. And if we have that mindset, regardless of the environment that we're in, David, that we have that opportunity to be successful. But certainly it's not lost on myself or anyone in terms of our profession, and still that, there is, opportunities. I would just say, and I'm very happy that one of my colleagues and friends, a lady of color, is the first ASSP board member that was elected since I served, and was honored to be the president during the 100th anniversary. So we need to see more of that involvement at professional safety organizations, as well within the private and public sector in the workplace.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And again, folks like yourself and your colleague are actually the examples that it's possible. It's like a lot of things. I mean, I saw my first firefighter who looked like me when I showed up for work the first day, because I'd never seen one. I thought it was interesting, but I'd never really seen it. And I believe that when you can see, you can look at anything, whatever it is, and see some similarity between you and the person who's doing it. It gives you, it gives you a little bit more hope that says, oh, okay, well, if they can do that, maybe I can do it too. And so again, just the opportunity to be able to chat with you is really very inspiring. And hopefully there are, young folks who are thinking about safety as a profession that will look and go like, well, I guess anybody can do this. And here's the other thing too. I will share that when the Occupational Safety and Health Act was passed in 1970, the 535 people who voted to pass it were not the most diverse group that I've ever seen. They were 98% male and 98% white. And that is not a comment about what they produce, because the OSH Act has had a tremendous impact on safety in the workplace, but they lacked perspective. So a bunch of men could write a law that would say his employment, his employer. That's what they would write because it affects them. And that's what I think about a lot of these discussions relative to safety, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's really just about adding perspective, because there's some things that a lot of things I don't know anything about. I've not been, physically disabled. I only speak one language. I was born in the U.S. I mean, there's all these things I don't know anything about. And to the extent we can get those voices involved, particularly when we talk about safety, we can have a system that works for more people. Not that it doesn't work, but it can work for more people when there are more voices that come to the table.
Yeah, and you just brought up another excellent point. When I even think about the construction industry and something as simple as personal protective equipment, as we're seeing, as I'm sure you're aware, David, more women entering the construction profession. I've had several students through the program I graduate that has moved on in the construction industry. And I had a conversation with one the other day and saying that how challenging it is for them just to get the appropriate PPE attire, for her to wear. I mean, she's like, 5'1", very, petite. But when you look at even the vendors and the manufacturers of PPE equipment, those are some things that maybe is lost in terms of the manufacturing of those materials. So to your point, that's just an example I just wanted to share, but I think it's something that we as a profession, along with, the supply chain and manufacturing and vendors, need to consider. Certainly.
Yeah. And this, like a lot of issues, it isn't a zero-sum game conversation. That's business opportunity that people are actually missing out on because they just hadn't considered it. No one had mentioned the fact that, perhaps we should be like we do for respirators. Perhaps every piece of PPE should be custom because, I have a friend, and I'll shout her out. Amy Russa has a YouTube channel. It's called the Safety Rack. And she talks about the fact that you just can't shrink it and pink it to have it work for women. It has to be built for women. But I think it has to be built for men of different heights. Everything that we do should be focused on, this is the hazard we're trying to protect people from. And this piece of equipment is designed to create a barrier between the hazard and the person. And it should all be unique. And it might cost slightly more, but I'm not certain that it wouldn't be slightly better if we took that approach.
Excellent point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, let's say you are in a room with some fellow C-suiters and, there's a conversation, getting back to this conversation about, the investment of time and money and policies around psychological safety, workplace mental health. And you've got, some CEOs and other executives in the room, and they're just, how do you get them to see the value, or can you get them to see the value?
Yeah. So what I would do, Dr. Daniels, and I would encourage others to consider this approach. So personally, what I would do is, once again, I would look at our mission, our values. We have 5 core values at our current company. And I would say all companies probably have a mission and value statement along with their core values. And what I would recommend and encourage EHS professionals is to look at those core values and say, how does psychosocial hazards connect? How are they aligned with our core values? For example, I would say most companies, including my current employer, when we look at employee recruitment and, more importantly, retention, we want to retain our employees, especially our top talent. Right. So what I would encourage an EHS professional is to demonstrate through their initiatives of work-life balance, through looking at those psychosocial risks, a couple that, I just outlined, and convey to the executive leadership team how those initiatives, that those strategies in health and safety are aligned with your core values. I would anticipate most companies has a core value of customer satisfaction, improving customer satisfaction. If you have OSAT scores, or if you have a way of measuring your customer satisfaction, you can also look at if you have a happier workforce, if you have a workforce that has work-life balance, okay, you're investing in your employees, I would anticipate that they're going to have those positive interactions with those customers. Right. So if that's a core value, align those core values with your EHS strategy. Right. Right. So, and I would give one other example in terms of, I know electrification is certainly an area of focus in industry, and certainly our current bus fleet, we're looking at, how we can grow, electric vehicles. And I actually recall recently where there was a customer that asked me a question. He said, Darryl, do you know any studies or impact in terms of your bus fleet and the noise of your buses? Is there any correlation in terms of employee behavior? Does it make them more excitable? Now, this is a superintendent that's asking these questions. So it certainly made me pause and followed up with the safety team and looking at a study, actually partnering with a major safety organization, one which you served on the board of directors, and actually looking at a study, partnering with some of our school districts to look at how does health and safety, all right, specifically looking at electrification of buses, that impacts that total student learning experience, because we know the early part of their experience is actually when they get on our buses, right? At the beginning of the day, before they even step foot in the classroom. So I think those are opportunities that I would encourage my EHS professionals and colleagues and friends to answer your question. In summary, is to align your existing core values. What is your mission? And just look at the opportunities and demonstrating that value, which I started early on in this conversation. And that's how you prove that value, proposition. And I think that will resonate at all levels in the organization, from the C-suite to certainly the employees, your workers that are certainly instrumental to our success.
Absolutely. Yeah. I made a statement. I was a guest on another podcast here recently. I made a statement. I'm going to double down on it, that I don't believe customers should be first. I think employees should be first, because how can you skip over the people that you expect to interact with the customer and not be concerned about their environment and how they're feeling? And again, this doesn't mean that, we have to give people everything that they want. No, we have to create an environment that is safe for people. And even when I don't get what I want, as long as I feel safe in that conversation, I'm going to present a better front. I'm going to present a better experience for the customer, because I'm not stressed out and worried and concerned and, and God forbid I haven't been bullied and mistreated by my supervisor. So, I'm going to give the customer a much better experience. This is, something I do. And I've been doing it really actually since I completed my research a couple of years ago, particularly when I go into service sector organizations, restaurants, and particularly, buying things. I will ask workers, what is it like to work there? I will. Because I want to know. I'm honestly, and sometimes I can tell by whether or not just they look that people don't ever ask them that, because nobody seems to be concerned about how they feel about their job. And some are just surprised that I asked. They go like, "Oh," but most, I tend to try to find places where people look happy working there because they're going to give me a better experience. And if they're not, I've also found myself talking to management and whatnot. In some cases, it says, the reason I come here, the reason I invest here is because you treat your folks well. Because if you don't, I probably won't come back, because I don't want to support that. I want to support environments. And again, it won't be perfect, but because, none of us are perfect. But when we have this mindset that says we want to create as safe an environment as possible to include how people feel, they're going to do a better job. They're going to provide better service for customers. At least that's my belief. Certainly.
Yeah, and Dr. Daniels, and just to follow up to that comment, and I haven't watched this show too many times, but you're probably familiar with the undercover CEO?
Yes. Undercover boss. Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
The undercover boss. That's it.
That's right.
Actually went into the workplace and found out how they were treating some of his employees. And many times they were shocked, right?
Yes.
The boss was surprised on how those employees treated customers. But
Yes, absolutely. So as we bring this conversation to a close, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to share to the folks who are listening? Just any closing thoughts you have about, the variety of topics we've conversed about.
I would suggest to the audience, first and foremost, this is a dynamic and growing field. It's been a personally gratifying profession, environmental health and safety, for myself. And I would encourage everyone to look at, reaching out to the Dr. David Daniels and other leaders in this career, in this field, and tap into their expertise. Because I would say, as I've transitioned throughout my career, that there was, I think those pivotal moments that, individuals provided a thought, provided an idea that certainly resonated with me. And I gave one or two examples today that certainly aided me in my overall growth and development. So I think networking is important, because we all have a story to tell that will benefit and aid those that's entering into the profession. And I would also say, just as a follow-up, that, really look at the profession and look at your own career growth in the prism and the lens, I would say, on how you can make an impact, how you can make a difference, at the end of the day. And that's probably why we entered into health and safety, to make that difference. So in sum, if we combine, using our networking, tapping into the knowledge and expertise, but also reflect on why we entered into health and safety and how we can make a difference, that it will be a very enjoyable and rewarding experience.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hill, for spending some time with me and sharing some of your expertise and experiences. I'm hopeful that those who've been tuning in will take the time to just let some of this ruminate, because there's some nuggets of wisdom there that I think a lot of folks can learn from. And for those of you who are watching this episode on the Flourish DX YouTube page, please do like, subscribe, and share. If you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope you'll come back and listen or watch us again. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found on psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. And please become a part of the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting to us on LinkedIn. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time and you hearing us next time on the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much. Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the FlourishDX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.